Hello and welcome. I'm Michelle Paver and we're going out live on Facebook and YouTube this evening. What are we going to be doing? I'm going to be, as usual, giving a little bit of a social media roundup, that is, social media about me and my books. I'm going to be recommending a book and a film that you might enjoy. And my favourite bit, I'm going to be answering your questions and reading out some of your wonderful comments. So first of all, social media. Well, this is a sort of, a slight departure from social media. It's as some of you know, I don't normally do sort of visits and events very much. I used to do quite a lot, but I made an exception at the beginning of this month. I was invited by Norwich School, who organised a wonderful Norwich festival in Norwich Cathedral itself. And so there's me. There's some of the footage showing about 800 children, coffee stains on one of my drafts and various artifacts. Those are the Inuit mittens. It was a really interesting time, beautifully organised by Norwich School. I really enjoyed talking to the students, showing them artifacts, signing lots of books, seeing the peregrine falcons. So that's a little bit of an aside. But moving on to the real social media stuff. One of the tweets I did at some point, I tweeted, was about Viking sunstones, and this just deserves a little bit more discussion. I mean, the idea of Vikings navigating when it was cloudy and they couldn't see the sun by means of Iceland spar, which is kind of calcite and as special properties, that's been around for quite a few decades. There's been suggestions that they did this, but then what I tweeted was a link to a physics study which shows that it's actually quite accurate. Not quite as good as a GPS, but pretty good. So I just thought that was quite interesting. Also, I think I mentioned this wonderful discovery of dinosaur footprints in Skye. And then I tweeted something quite close to my heart, the bristlecone pines, another very ancient trace of life. In fact, these are living. About 20 years ago, I went on a tree pilgrimage when I was in the Rocky Mountains. I drove quite a long way out of my way into the Sierra Nevada to go and see the bristlecone pines. And one of the things that I found most moving wasn't one of the huge big ones, which is thousands and thousands of years old. I saw a little one, which was about waist high on me. And I asked one of the rangers and they said, it was probably about 90 years old, which I found really touching. It just looked like a Christmas tree. And then moving on to some of your tweets, Adele, practically hyperventilating there. Because I'd retweeted. Well, I do retweet tweets if they're interesting or just happen to strike me. So I hope you got over that, Adele. And then Jo Howard sounds like one of the world's great mothers, not just because she's reading my book to her 8-year-old, but because she's reading to her 8-year-old son. And Jo, wonderful. Thank you for all the nice things you said. But it's also great to hear that you're reading to your son. My mother read to me. It's just wonderful. I've never forgotten it. So I hope you continue to enjoy it. Something else dear to my heart. Yes, this is wonderful. I tweeted a few times about Zulu, wonderful film made in the 60s, if ever you've seen it, because I have a family connection. My dad was South African. He was very homesick. So we used to go and watch Zulu. And one of the wonderful, Cy Endfield was the wonderful director, co-producer, co-writer. And Eden Enfield, who was 3, was on the set. So that's incredible. Thank you for getting in touch, Eden. I think you say something like, sounds like you enjoyed the film. Eden, I grew up with that film. The whole quotations are regularly bandied about between me and my sisters on text and everything. So yeah, that's an understatement. But thank you for getting in touch, and I'm glad you enjoyed Dark Matter. Moving on, George also enjoyed Dark Matter, read and finished in one night, which I always like to hear because it took me about a year to write, but I love to hear that you read it at one sitting because that's how I designed it. I'm also glad you had some nightmares, so that's great to hear. And also Ruth also enjoyed Thin Air. Can't put it down. Good that you're not feeling so well. Well, I'm not sorry about that. I hope you're feeling better. But also, I love the fact that you say it's scarily brilliant dark matter as well. So thank you for mentioning these things. Sorry, it sounds very big-headed to be retweeting or mentioning these again, but it's just jolly nice to have these comments. I can't tell you. Moving on to Stephen, who's mentioned Thin Air, mentions it in the same breath as M.R. James. That's an honour, Stephen. Thank you. If you don't know M.R. James, he's the father of and the greatest writer of English ghost stories, Edwardian antiquarian of huge note, and well worth picking up a copy of his collected ghost stories. They've never been out of print. So finally, those are some of your tweets, but I've got a little bit of announcement. This is a tweet on Book Brunch, which is a sort of meeting, as I understand it, of publishers who get together, and they're just mentioning HOZ, that's Head of Zeus, my new wonderful publishers. And yes, I do have a new book, which will be coming out next April. It's called Wakenhurst. There we are, with a Y. We don't have any visuals at the moment, so my agent has, oh, that's rather good, Peter, thank you. What is it? Well, it's, you're welcome. It's got ghostly elements. It's an adult. It's a grown-up book. It's got ghostly elements, but I think I'd describe it as gothic. And what do I mean by that? Well, something gothic generally means an enclosed space. It's an enclosed setting. In this case, it's an ancient manor house in the Suffolk Fens, which are sort of marshlands, ancient marshlands. And into this ancient setting intrudes, and it's an Edwardian setting, I should say, so it's in the sort of early 1900s, something from the past, something that's not right, pokes its ugly head. So as I say, there are ghostly elements, but it's mostly gothic. I spent all last year writing it and most of the year before. I think it's one of the best things I've ever done. We haven't got a cover yet, but when we do, I'll be showing you the cover, and it's coming out in April next year. So enough of that. You'll be hearing more about Wakenhurst from time to time. Now, before I go, I'm scooting on to the questions. I have some recommendations, which I'll just drag out here. Yes, two. One is a book. And the book is supposedly a children's book. Yes, it is. Moominland Midwinter. This is my copy, my ancient Puffin copy, which I had when I was about 10. Tove Jansson was a Finnish writer. You can see the Moomins on there. I've chosen this one because I think it's got appeal for both children and adults. Moomintroll, who's the hero, he's one of the Moomins, wakes up because they hibernate. They go to sleep for the winter because the Finnish winter is very heavy, and Moomins go to sleep in the winter, but he wakes up. And the Moomin house is quiet because the whole family is sleeping, but only he is awake. And so it feels like a different country. I mean, I've always wanted to be snowed in, so there's that amazing feeling, but it's also quite strange. And all sorts of strange characters start turning up. And one of my favourites is the Groke, who is just like a sort of big grey mass. And it's a she, and she puts out fires, and wherever she's very cold. And let me just read a bit, that'll explain it a bit more. Her little round eyes reflected the glow, but otherwise she was just a large, shapeless greyness. There was a sharp hissing sound, and the hilltop was wrapped in mist. When it passed away again, no embers from the fire were to be seen, only the big grey Groke blowing snow fog about her. And later on somebody says, she didn't come here to extinguish the fire, she came to warm herself, poor creature. But everything that's warm goes cold when she sits down on it. Now she's disappointed once more. And so then later on we see the Groke gliding down the ice again and back into the dark as she had come alone. So she's quite an interesting character, the Groke. And in a way, it's kind of like the whole book can be read as a sort of metaphor for depression and what happens in the winter. So you can read it on different levels. If you're grown up, I recommend you have a try. And this is a groke, not one I prepared earlier. It's just one who lives in my in between my Homer and my superstition dictionary on my bookshelf. So try it and see. And then in my case, it's a DVD, but you can probably get a download or whatever you do these days. The film is Kwaidan, a Japanese compilation of ghost stories. It's 4 ghost stories made in the 1960s, 65, I think it was. So it's 4 Japanese ghost stories from an anthology by a wonderful writer called Lafcadio Hearn, by great director Masaki Kobayashi. And I would just recommend them if you like ghost stories. If you're not Japanese, you'll just find it's a different kind of sensibility about the supernatural, which you might find interesting. As you can probably see from these clips, it's visually stunning. It's just gorgeous. And it's a fascinating take on a number of very, very original ghost stories. So there we are. Those are the 2 recommendations. I hope something to beguile your time there. And yes, oh yes, beautiful, beautiful visuals. But now we move on. Ask Michelle anything. Yes, and boy, you have this time, haven't you? I've had some great questions. So let's start off with one which is a deceptively simple question, one from Zia, who's got some lovely things to say about my books. She first read Gods and Warriors when you were 11 and then moved on to Chronicles. You're currently working on a novel, which is great. And this is the deceptively simple question. I wonder if I could possibly ask you, well, there are 2 questions. Could you share some tips on how you motivated yourself and kept going when you felt as if the book you were writing would be a flop? And also how you came upon your publishers. Well, I can deal with the second one first. That's not easy either, finding publishers, but it's a bit easier to talk about. I didn't know anybody. The way I found publishers was simply to send off my work to them and hope that they'll publish me, and then they sent it back and said no, and you just keep doing that. But the important thing is to send it in the form in which they want it. So don't send them a whole manuscript. If they just ask for a covering letter and 1 page or the first chapter, that's what you send them. How do you find out what they want? Well, I used something called the Writer's Handbook. Now you can see it's way out of date. That's the last time I used it, because then I got a publisher before then. But there's probably an online version. There's also the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which is another one. Those are the 2, and they list all the publishers and how they want to be contacted and what kind of things they publish. So have a look at that. Try to find an agent first. And again, those books, that will start you off, because that will also give you listings for agents. So but there's no shortcut. That's what you do. You find out how to send, how publishers want things sent to you, and then you just try, and then you have to pick yourself up off the floor if they reject you, which they probably will. They certainly did to me. But with luck, the rejection letters will get better. Motivation. How do you keep yourself motivated? Well, that's a really interesting question, and not many people ask that. But that is the big question, really. And trying to think about it, how do I keep myself motivated? Well, part of it is the environment you're in. Have a place where you like to write. Get rid of your phone or silence it. Silence the internet. There are actually programs which can shut your internet down for a set number of minutes or even hours, so you can't get at it. If you don't have much willpower, great idea. I mean, I'm talking to you from the computer up in my spare room. So that's where my internet is kept, and it's kept under a plastic bag like a parrot or something. Where I write doesn't have the internet. That's one thing. Don't set yourself big targets. Writing something every day is better than nothing. Even if it's just half an hour, it's better than nothing. Another thing I think, I was trying to think about this, is trust your previous self. You know, if you have that awful feeling when you've started a story and then you lose faith in it, well, think back. You know, you weren't an idiot before when you were quite keen on that story. So try to think back to what motivated you, or what made you think, oh, there's something here, and trust that self, because you haven't suddenly changed and got much more sophisticated. Conversely, though, you could ask yourself, well, have I sort of veered off course from where the original idea came from? That might be something. You know, asking yourself questions can be helpful. And also, I think, be kind to your future self, because you will feel a lot better if you have written something, or at least sat at your desk and thought about your story. Now, the funny thing is, I speak from personal experience, because I had a great run of about 11 days just recently of writing, and it was easy, even though we had a horrible heat wave and all the rest of it. And I woke up this morning completely unmotivated. I had a lovely clear day ahead of me, apart from doing this tonight, and I just didn't want to do anything. Completely unmotivated. So I had to go through all of these different things to persuade myself to do about 3 hours writing. It wasn't actually writing, it was just sitting at my desk before I had to do the preparation for this. So it doesn't get much easier. We all have that problem with not being motivated. So that's quite a long to one of the questions, but I think it deserved it, because it's quite a round question and it all sorts of things. And if all else fails, go for a walk. Now, here we have Michael, who's written the most wonderful account, actually. I mean, you've said some wonderful things about my books, about Thin Air and Dark Matter. But I think that the bit I love, and thank you for that, is your experience of when you were reading the books, because it applies to any experience of reading a good ghost story. A feeling that descends on me makes me feel trapped. This is when he's reading, in claustrophobic darkness. I want to escape this emotion. I want to stop reading this story. I want out. But yet, like the compulsive, haunted characters, I can't. I just got to check one more page. Check. And recheck the next one. When the stories finally end, I'm relieved. I feel like I've been released back into the world of light. Back from the red. Like somehow I forgot that was even possible. How brilliantly put. That's really great. I'm honoured that my stories had that effect, but I've had that feeling when I've been reading M.R. James, and you've obviously know your ghost stories. So what a marvellous comment, and thank you so much for that. Now, moving on. Oh, this is something slightly personal. Yes, Bill Paver. A Paver from Austin, Texas, I'm guessing. Yeah, it's not a very usual name, and we're obviously related somehow. And it's wonderful to hear that you've been sharing my books with your pupils and your children and grandchildren. You're quite right. The Paver family is, there was a South African emigration. My lot date, we go back, don't worry, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we go back to, I think, the 1547 is the earliest grave in a little village called Spofforth, in just west of York. And there was a Richard Paver who fought in the Civil War in England on the side of Charles I. And then we went out to South Africa in the 1820s. The link with Wolf Brother is that my father's sister was my weird Auntie Ursula, and she married a game ranger. She was very interested in African culture and superstitions and beliefs. She used to send us the most amazing presents, just boxes full of, a small stuffed baby crocodile and things. And one of the things she sent me, reaching over here, is two really scary looking dolls, which are made of bark. They're made of tree bark. I think they're quite frightening. I mean, I never played with dolls anyway. These are not the sort of dolls you play with. These belonged to a Sangoma, a witch doctor. That's according to her covering letter. And then the other thing, which some readers of Chronicles may recognise, is a medicine horn. And this is actually cow horn, but it's got a little top on. It's got lots of earth blood on it because it's full of iron oxide. And this is what gave me the idea for Thorax medicine horn. And actually, I sent a sketch of it to Jeff Taylor, when he was doing the illustrations for Oathbreaker. And if I hold that up, this is chapter 38, you can just see, I think, yes. So there, that's the link. But thank you for getting in touch, Bill Paver from Austin, Texas. And now moving on to Finn Schroeder, who is German, I think, but you'd never guess it from this impeccable English. A nice short question. He's asked another question later on about the farewell greeting, may the guardian run, swim, fly with you. What about, did I ever think about how members of the Willow and Rowan clan say this greeting? Oh, yes, I thought about it, but, you don't get a chance to put everything in the books. They say, may the guardian hunt with you. That's what they say. And incidentally, that's what the Viper clan said as well. The Viper clan does not say, may the guardian slither with you, because this just sounds ridiculous. But it's a good question. So it's just one of those things that I never quite got round to putting in the book. You can't put everything in. Now, Bella, she's also got a couple of questions, but she's asked an interesting one. First of all, just says you finished Gods and Warriors yesterday. You've been putting it off for a while. I understand that, actually, because you enjoyed Wolf Brothers so much and you wanted to read something similar, but you weren't sure about getting used to new characters. I understand that. But then later on, you've got a question which was prompted by reading about both of them, is in the Bronze Age or the Stone Age, how did people survive eating raw animals? That's a good question. But when you think about it, Bella, we do. Lots of people still eat raw animals. Japanese people eat raw fish. I love raw fish if it's properly, prepared and everything and very fresh. In Mexico and parts of South America, they make something called ceviche, which is fish prepared with lemon juice or lime juice, which effectively cooks it. But it prevents it from going bad. The Inuit, the Eskimos, they eat raw seal. I've certainly eaten raw seal liver, which is actually very nice. It sort of slips down. It's quite sweet and sort of jellyish. So we do eat raw food, and Aborigines eat raw food. I think the question is how is it that people who eat it don't get ill? I think partly it's because you've got to get used to it, and so your gut get the right bacteria to break it down. If you've heard of intestinal flora, you have to be used to it. And also, it's fair to say there's a risk. You might be unlucky. I remember when I was eating the raw seal liver, it did cross my mind. I thought, intestinal parasites, tapeworms and things like that. I wonder if it's worth the risk. And sometimes you get unlucky. I mean, there was a very famous Danish/Greenlandic explorer called Knud Rasmussen, and I believe I'm right in saying that he did die from eating something, sort of an Inuit dish called kiviak, which is basically fermented raw seabirds. So you can get unlucky, but people like Torak and Ren and Pyrrha and Hylas they've grown up eating raw meat, so that's not, they'll be all right mostly, but they could get unlucky. Good question. Amber. Now, Amber is 12 and she loves my books, and she tells this lovely story about once I was so into Oathbreaker that I got into my car whilst reading, drove all the way to school. Well, I think your mother or father drove you to school. And then when I got out of school, I realised that I had been so caught up in your book, I had forgotten my shoes. It's brilliant. Oh, I love that. Sorry about that, Amber, but it does raise quite a picture. You also enjoy writing. And that's lovely 3 lines. Hello, this is written by Amber. My voice echoed in the darkness. I didn't get an answer. I never did. I like that too. I think it's smashing. And then you're quoting your favourite line from my story, which I'd completely forgotten, about Ren trying to howl. And then she sounded so funny, they both collapsed laughing. Thank you for reminding me of that. I'd completely forgotten that. And also, you mentioned that you did your book report on Soul Eater, Amber, which is probably my favourite of that series. Let me just show you my copy of Soul Eater, which is, I think I've shown you before on one of these things, but there we are. It's all a bit sort of chewed and you probably can't see, but there are little tooth marks in here, and I can now show you why. If we can show the pictures, yes, I was at Waterstones somewhere, I think it was one of the big ones. You can see all the photographers, and we had Torak, who was about 4.5 months. In other words, the same age roughly as when Wolf is towards the end of the Wolf brother. And, yes, he got a bit of a handful, and he did have a chew at my book, and that's why it's got those teeth marks on it. So it's quite special to me. So I just thought I'd share that with you, Amber. But good luck with the writing, and thanks for getting in touch. And Ben now, moving on to Ben. Oh yes, this is an interesting one. Ben has seen a preview of a film which is called Alpha, but he thought it was something to do with Wolf Brother. And you're just asking me, seems to be ripped from Wolf Brother, can't seem to find any connection. Have you seen the preview? My agent, Ben, showed it to me. He drew it to my attention a few months ago. So yeah, I have seen the preview just once. I didn't really want to see it again. I can tell you, I've had nothing to do with the film. The first I knew of it was when my agent showed me the trailer. So if anyone does see it, I'd be interested to know, I've had a few other comments from people. I'd be interested to know what people think of it. But thanks for mentioning that, Ben. And now we move on to, I hope I get this name right, Sebastian Stjernfeldt, Swedish, again, amazing English, 21 years old. And you obviously read the books when you were a bit younger, I think. Or I don't know, but you're a big fan of them, and you found, thank you for finding this, a video of Ian McKellen recording the audio for Oathbreaker. I remember this being recorded because I was in the studio when Ian did all the recordings, but I didn't know that the publishers had ever used it. So thank you for drawing this to our attention, Sebastian. One thing I would say about Ian, you can see he's very, very expressive, and it's really quite fascinating. But you can see he's wearing quite a sort of soft t-shirty type thing. This was deliberate because the first time he came along, he was wearing quite a crisp, very nice cotton shirt, but it crackled too much. And at one point he was moving his arms, so we had to ask him very nicely, would you mind just? And then after that, he learnt to wear something softer because there he's keeping quiet, but in some of the other scenes he really starts moving around. But yes, it is fantastic. So check that out on YouTube, and you'll be able to, I hope you enjoy the audios because they are fantastic. He did an amazing job. As I say, I was in the studio all the time. And now we've got Finn again, Finn Schroeder, we're back, and this is a long one. And thank you for not including spoilers, Finn. That was brilliant. You've just finished reading Ghost Hunter in German. And thank you. I'm glad you think it was a beautiful ending and dealt with the questions and things. And then you go on, what fascinated me is the belief system of the clans. And you describe it very well, after reading up a bit on the topic. Much of it seems very typical of ethnic religions. You're quite right. The animatedness of nature, absolutely. And you have, the three souls and the way they interact with one another in the world. And you're asking me, what was your inspiration for that? I'm really glad you zeroed in on that. I knew from quite a lot of cultures that it wasn't just one soul that they believed in. It was, in fact, Judeo-Christian people are unusual in a sense of just believing in one soul. So ancient Egyptians, for example, believed in quite a lot of different souls or different aspects of the personality, as it were, in psychological terms. The Inuit as well, I was quite interested in them because they believed in a sort of name soul and then some sort of a world soul, and they're also Native Americans. It's a little difficult for me to remember, quite honestly, where I got all these things from, because very quickly, this was one of the things that came almost before the plots. And actually, here's from my original notes, which you can probably see they're not scribbled on. Those are actually as I wrote them in 2003 when I was thinking up the idea for Wolf Brother, and it's all there. The name soul, the clan soul, and the world soul. And it was once I had that, I suddenly realized everything fits into place then. What happens when you lose one or the other, that depends on whether you become a ghost or a demon. And it was a very nice moment. So I'm glad you've zeroed in on that. But the other thing that I would say is the sort of idea of animatedness. I got that particularly from the Sami people. So not everything in the world can talk, but it can all hear and think, and everything has a spirit. So that's the sort of Sami idea. And the other question you had, Finn, was, did you already know what would happen in the other parts, all to the end of the series? You know, when you were writing Wolf Brother, did you have an idea of the whole story arc? Yeah, I did. But there were big changes sometimes. So I had an idea of where Torak was going to go in each of the books. You know, Soul Eater was going to be the cold one, Outcast was going to be the watery one by the Lake Axehead, that sort of thing. I knew how it was going to end. I knew who was going to die, and I knew which Soul Eater was going to be important in each book. But exactly how each book what was going to happen, that I left to when I was writing. And so, you know, Ren made me change everything in the plot of Spirit Walker, for example, because she wouldn't stay at home and she had to be involved. In Soul Eater, I thought it was going to be Torak and Bale up in the far north. But again, no, it was going to be Ren because she just didn't want to be left at home. That was her kind of character. But yes, I did have to. So there's certain things, secrets about Ren, for example, I had to know that. And about, well, I don't want to spoil things, but about Far's knife and things, I had to know what the secret was. Otherwise, I'd tied myself in knots. So yeah. So moving on, Emilia. You're 16 and some lovely things to say about Chronicles and Gods and Warriors. Grew up with them in my heart. And even though they're books, they're basically parents to me. That is a fantastic thing to say. Thank you so much, Emilia. 2 questions. Yeah, difficult ones, Emilia. Why do you write books? Is it because you want to influence the world? No, not really. Or do you just enjoy it? I don't always enjoy it, actually. Probably gathered, I sort of sometimes hate it. Didn't have a very nice morning writing. It's a compulsion. I don't know why I like to write. I started writing when I was 5, and I enjoyed being able to make things happen. And then when I was about 10, I was bullied at school for a year. All the girls in my class ganged up on me, so I had to sort of start making stories up because I didn't have anyone to play with. So that kind of helped. And generally, it's just a compulsion, and I feel better when I've done some writing. I feel amazing sometimes. Sometimes it's fantastic, and I can practically see the characters, and then it's wonderful, or frightening if you're writing a ghost story. And the second question you have is, you mentioned you research the books a lot. What does researching entail? Again, it's a good one, because some things I don't need to research, things like emotions. If I'm writing about depression or anger or love or jealousy, well, I've experienced all of those, so I don't have to research them. But if I'm writing about volcano, I like to try and visit one, preferably if it's erupting, so I can not only see it, but smell it and describe it. The aim of it is to make it real. That's why I do the research. That's why I swam with killer whales and went to the foothills of the Himalayas for thin air, went to the Arctic for dark matter. It's to make it real. It also gives you ideas. You get ideas for the story when you're there. And I feel as if the characters are with me. And that's partly why I do it. I always go alone so that, you know, the characters can be with me. And I do get ideas. So I always go when I'm actually doing the story. Of course, some of it is in books and in libraries and things, and that's fun too. But the best is when I'm out in the field. Here is Emilia again. Another one, yes, completely forgot. In Chronicles of Ancient Darkness and Gods and Warriors, both your main characters are male and your secondary characters are female. Is there a reason for this? Is there, in any new series, would you consider it the other way around? Well, I think Ren might have something to say about that, because she's almost equal billing with Torak. Similarly, Pyrrha, but I know what you mean. You know, it's mostly Torak's story. this wasn't planned. You know, so much of writing is subconscious. A character walks into your head, a story, some spark. You don't know where that comes from. Now, that just raises the question then, why did the male character come into my head instead of a female character? And I did ask myself that question when I was writing or starting to write Wolf Brother. It might have been because I was a child growing up in the 60s and all the really interesting children's books had boys doing stuff, whereas the girls were either doing ballet or just making jam sandwiches for the boys who had the adventures and that sort of thing. You know, I don't know. I think it's partly to do with what kind of story it is. I mean, you know, Dark Matter and Thin Air both have all male casts. Yeah, well, that's because they're set in the 30s, in the time of exploration and mountaineering, when they were mostly men. Wakenhurst, my new Gothic story, has a female protagonist. It's a very female-oriented book. So it's partly just the story. But yes, it's an interesting question. And finally, we have two questions, which I'll just read them first and then I'll answer them. These are questions that we have had asked before, but Mary's daughter loves Chronicles of Ancient Darkness, and she's wondering if there will be more books in the series. And interestingly, following on what we've been saying, thank you for being such an inspiration for young girls. Well, thank you for that, Mary. I'm glad the books are. And then Guillaume, who's from France. Bonsoir, Guillaume. First of all, I wanted to say how much I love Chronicles. Thank you for that. I'd love to get away with Torek and Wolf in the Forest whenever I want to get my mind off things. I know the feeling. My question is, will there be a sequel to these books? And you also say there's a small but growing fandom on Instagram. It would be nice if you could put the word out. Well, I'm putting the word out. Guillaume, if you can let us have the link, please do, and then we'll publicize it on my website. So the question, yes, is there going to be a sequel to Chronicles of Ancient Darkness? Well, I've answered this question before, but I will again. I've always said in the past no, because, you know, it was conceived as a 6-book series, and I think series have a shape, and you shouldn't go beyond that. But I always left the possibility open that, you know, if I had a really good idea, I would consider it. And I must say that Tarek and Ren and Wolf and Finkedin, of all the characters in my stories, they're the ones who haven't really gone away. You know, with most books, when you write a book and you finish it and it's published, it feels like they've gone, you know, and they're out in the world and they belong to the public now. And of course, you know, these books, Chronicles do, but they've never really gone away. So, you know, let's just say it's becoming more possible that there will be a sequel. I'd love to if I had a really good idea. And just going back to where we started with all these questions, you know, the first one was about motivation and that sort of thing. If I ever do write a sequel, then every one of you who has asked that question and said, oh, please, can we have a sequel, can pat themselves on the back and say, well, I've had something to do with it, because it really helps in being motivated to know that, yeah, people would like a sequel. So thank you, both of you, Guillaume and Mary, and Mary's daughter, for asking that question. And, you know, watch this space. But now I think I've been wittering on for quite long enough. I think we've run out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for all your, you know, fabulous questions and comments. And I just also wanted to say I haven't had time to read out every single word of some of your longer comments, but be assured that I have read them. What happens is my agent prints them out and sends them all to me. I'm a bit low tech, and then I read them all and annotate them and that sort of thing. So I have read them, every single word. And I also just wanted to say the best way of contacting me, because as many of you may know, I don't sort of respond directly to posts because I'm just too busy writing. So the best way to get in touch with me is click on my website, michellepaver.com. You can see the homepage, if that's the right word, and then you click on Ask, and then fill in the form with your questions or your comments, and I will answer in the next program. And you can also keep up to date with me on Twitter at Michelle Paver, and here on Facebook as well. So that's all we've got time for the moment. All it remains for me to say is goodbye until the next time, and happy reading.